Good, very early morning, and welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics live stream. I am back with John and one of our favorites, if not our favorite, Pepe Escobar, Mr. Multipolarity, finally home in NATO Stan. How are you, Pepe? It's so good to see you.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, John. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be with you guys. Very early in the West Coast. I'm sorry about that. I am in NATO Stern and it's 3 in the afternoon. So basically, nothing happens in the NATO Stern at 3 in the afternoon. But I was watching your intro video and it's a killer because it contains the best quote of the past 10 years. The Russian military, they are taking chips from dishwashers. And you know what they did? They built a thing called Oreshnik. So this is how you build Oreshnik.
We built Oreshnik.
And then you have Mach 10, and then you can hit London in 19 minutes with chips from dishwashers.
How fast can they hit you? London in 19, Paris
is 12. I was having dinner Friday night with my wife, and we were laughing our table because I told her, look, we are only 12 minutes away from Oreshnik. There you go. Of course, it will not be Paris. It will be, NATO doesn't have bases around here. So it will be most probably London, 19 minutes, Berlin, 15, Warsaw, if I remember well, 9. There you go. And of course, very important, Russian military side, they made a few calculations. And this is fascinating because, Oreshnik has 6 warheads, subdivided by 6. So in the end, it's 36, like everything individually controlled. They calculated that if only one of this no nuclear warheads, with 150 kilotons, traveling at over Mach 10. So between Mach 10 and Mach 20, we'll get almost 12,000 kilometers an hour. They could hit a target in that very, very important Aegis ashore base in Poland, in a place called Rodzikowo. I'm sorry. Rodzikowo in Poland. I'm really sorry. Rodzikowo in Poland. It can get there in 2 minutes if it's launched from Kaliningrad. So these people, they obviously, they can even look at their watches and the thing already hit. And obviously what happened in Dnipropetrovsk was fascinating because half an hour before they launched Oreshnik, they warned the Americans. This is normal protocol, as you all know, and our audience knows. But the actual flight was something around probably between a maximum 10 minutes. So they warned, they waited, they launched. And while the Americans were about, what the hell is this? An experimental missile and all that. And then they think, so okay, it's this time it's not far-fetched to say this is a game changer.
Well, what do you think about how the Americans used to always say, we will know if they launched an ICBM when the silo doors open, and we didn't know until later?
Because essentially, Sarah, they never knew in advance about Kinzhal, Zircon, Avangard, Sarmat, and now Oreshnik. They never know in advance because they don't know what the Russian industrial military complex is working on. And, this is for our American friends, all of you. This is a state complex, essentially. A few parts are privatized, but this is basically nationalized. So this is an enormous state complex, in fact, just like in China, for instance. Only a few bits and pieces are privatized, big Russian companies, essentially, no foreigners. So the Americans, so they can, the PR company starts, the PR campaign starts immediately after. This was an experimental missile. You didn't even know this thing existed. Because Peskov, spokesman, a Putin spokesman, he said on the record that a very small, rarefied circle knew about this project. And this is not the only one. There are others. So Friday, when Putin met with the big honchos of the industrial military complex, Minister of Defense, he said there are several similar systems being tested. So this was the first test of Oreshnik, but there are others, and they're being tested. And he also said, we already have a stockpile of Oreshniks. It's not that they had one, but the Americans and the Brits are saying, they have only one. No, there is already a stockpile. Obviously, we can more or less guess would be between 10 and 20, maybe. But serial mass production starts now. And the guy in charge of the factory, he was at the Putin meeting. He said, yes, we are starting immediately. So the test was successful. They're starting immediately. So in a few months, they're going to have 100 Oreshniks, maybe. Okay, in 1 year, realistically. So it is a game changer because it's without a nuclear weapon. You all remember the discussion for the past few weeks. Russia is going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which was bullshit in the first place. But this is part of the PR campaign. Without a nuclear weapon, you have a neutral effective system that is, you can compare it to a tactical nuclear weapon in terms of destructive power. But at the same time, it's a precision weapon. It's like a precision bullet shot by a super sniper. So I was trying to find how to define Oreshnik. Maybe we could define it in one sentence, like this. Non-nuclear, as destructive as a tactical nuclear weapon, but acting like a precision bullet.
Well, I like what...
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes.
No, yeah, I liked what you wrote. Russia has been trying to send these signals to Western leaders. And what you wrote was really good. You said now these Western leaders don't know if Oreshnik handing you a business card will come with a nuclear weapon or not. And you talked about how it's like a shot from a super sniper. You don't know if that's going to come with a nuclear warhead. But the problem is that our leaders in the West, I mean, Russia for some time has been trying to send these different signals to the West that, hey, we're serious. We're going to take this escalation. If you threaten the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation, we will respond in kind, and we will take this with the utmost seriousness. But it seems like the Western leaders, for whatever reason, cannot see the dangerous escalatory path that they put themselves on. So my concern here is that even with Oreshnik, there is just this level of ignorance by the West as to Russia's, how they perceive their own core strategic interests. So what do you think about that?
It's a very good point, John, because we already have graphic proof that they don't listen. There were 2 attack MS attacks, of course, on, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday and yesterday in Kursk. So this was after Oreshnik. 2 at least. Maybe there'll be another one between today and tomorrow. So obviously they didn't listen. That's exhibit number 1. Number 2, did you see what that stupid Dutchman, Rob Bauer, said yesterday? This was all over the place. Bauer is the chairman of a sort of strategic NATO command, something like that, one of those bureaucratic things that they have within NATO. We are seriously considering using preemptive strikes against the Russian Federation. Wow, he managed to the impossible. He managed to be more imbecile than that Norwegian piece of wood, Norwegian wood, Stoltenberg. And he said that on the record. Wow. Number three is very, very interesting. Let me see if I find it here, guys, because I was looking at it. Narishkin head of Foreign Intel in Russia, SVR. He said, among other things, the West is interested in not suffering a strategic defeat itself and preserving the Russophobic regime in Kiev, which is basically Oreshnik saying, look, whatever you try, we will continue with our objectives with the SMO. He said, which goes to the second point, Russia categorically rejects any freezing of the Ukrainian conflict, meaning all these so-called Trump plans for a ceasefire are dead in the water. And everybody knows that. Everybody with a functioning IQ, Atlanticists, and everybody in Moscow. Very, very important. Because the conditions were already explicit for months. Putin himself, and the last time he talked about it was during the his Valdai Club Q&A. Demilitarization of Ukraine, neutrality of Ukraine, all the gains in the battlefield for Russia, of course, end of sanctions. Can you imagine a Trump administration agreeing to all of that? We all know it's not going to happen. So whatever they present, the Russians are going to look at it and with the typical Russian smear, because try again. And you don't want anything else? Okay, simple. It will continue the way you want it in the battlefield until we decide to stop. And if you go for an escalation, which is something that this is part of a huge PR campaign as well, that Trump would threaten Russia with an escalation in Ukraine, weaponizing Ukraine to the max. Now you have Oreshnik and others. So you know that we can more or less, let's say our partial conclusion for the moment is that this demented escalation drive is not controlled by the collective West anymore. It's controlled by Russia. Because they can escalate with something that nobody else has. They can escalate with a system that can counterattack anything, anywhere, anytime, in record time, Mach 10, Mach 11, and people will never know what hit them. So in this sense, it is a game changer, you know.
Well, in another sense, I think it's a game changer because, like you said, this can bring the war literally to Europe's front porch. And
yes.
with this understanding, you know, Europe also has to be prepared for wartime footing, and they're just not, right? We've seen this operation plan Germany trying to get logistically caught up to adjust for the conditions of war, but it seems like on the Russian side there's already this momentum in this direction. And then just speaking anecdotally, you know, Sarah and I were in Moscow recently. Hopefully we'll get to see you on one of these trips in the near future.
Exactly. I knew that you were there, but this is what you arrived, I think 1 or 2 days after I left to Turkey.
I know. You went to Valdai?
Yes. Yeah. No, I followed Valdai from here.
Okay.
Because I was too tired and I said, do I really need to go to Valdai? No, because I can follow it online. And some of the members are my friends. So I can always call them and say, okay, what did you discuss today? You know, my friend Paulo Nogueira Batista, the Brazilian economist, he was there. In fact, he asked an excellent question to Putin during the Q&A. So I didn't need to go there. So I prefer to watch from afar, which gives you sometimes a broader picture. Now, and the G20, the same thing. People in Brazil told me, don't come here, it's going to be a waste of time. And in the end, it was amazing because the Brazilians managed to save the G20s. We can talk about this slightly later. But tell me, guys, give me 1 minute about your Russian experience.
Oh, it was amazing.
Striking thing for you in Russia.
My favorite thing in Russia was the working with the students from Moscow University. So that
Moscow University, which is one of the best, probably the best in Russia.
Yeah, we talked about propaganda. That was my favorite part, hands down. And the dinner. We had a dinner with like with ballet dancers and stuff like that. It was really nice.
Yeah, the Russians are very good at throwing this.
And Red Square. That was great. The Red Square was great.
Did you go late, very, very late at night where there's nobody?
No, we were there during the day
That's
on a
time.
Sunday, but it wasn't even that crowded.
Go after midnight, there's literally nobody.
That's
It's
crazy.
magical. It's absolutely and of course, all the lights are on. This is not
Mhm.
Paris. Friday night, I was coming back from my dinner in Paris. The first thing that I noticed, this is a very dark city. You know
They have
why?
to save
They're
on
trying,
energy.
they're trying to cut costs.
They have to save.
It used to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world at night. Now it looks like a slum at night.
Mm.
It's horrible.
Yeah, that was
Also, as you saw it, is Gazprom special everywhere you go.
yeah.
Everything's lit up in Moscow. You can't go to sleep in Moscow. Everything's
Exactly.
like lit up. Yeah.
I mean, that was one of my takeaways, and this is like why I asked the question originally, because when we were in Moscow, it's like it's very nice. I mean, you just get the sense, especially. I mean, we were in Moscow City, so in the financial district, and you walk around, and there's really no homeless people. You don't see the same like levels of like drug addicts walking around.
Poverty, no homelessness, no junkies, no syringes.
No junkies. The subway feels very safe. Like you said, everything's very well lit up.
Extremely safe, the subway.
I go back to, so I fly back to New York City, right? So I'm going directly from Moscow. And then I had a short layover in Qatar at the airport. It was very nice. And then I came back to New York City, and I go out on the streets in the morning in New York City. And in comparison, it's like someone opened the doors to the insane asylum and let everybody out. And and I know it's this way in Paris, in London, in Berlin.
Right, you should see Paris. Paris is in rough competition with New York to see which one looks like a slum. Really,
yeah, it really is crazy, and that's why I got to why I was asking the question of, these Western countries, they are just not prepared for a war. I really think that they don't understand how stratified their societies are, right?
Mm-hmm.
How disappointed the public is at large with the political leadership, and we saw this in the U.S. elections too, right? Where like 70% of people were either dissatisfied or strongly dissatisfied with their presidential election choices. So Oreshnik being a game changer, right? As you were talking about, bringing the war to the front porch of Europe and possibly even further. I don't think that the Western leaders are really grasping the magnitude of these developments.
Of course they don't, John, because they are so remote in a, I'm going to quote Macron himself. In the beginning of his first term, he said it's going to be a Jupiterian mandate. He thinks he's actually Jupiter. He's a bloody psycho, but he thinks he's Jupiter. And he's hated by, I'm not making this up, 90% of the French population. If you go anywhere, even here in Paris, and you ask people in the streets, they hate his guts. And they feel absolutely furious because there's no way to evict this guy from the Élysée Palace. You know what they did in the beginning of this week, Macron and Starmer? They started to rediscuss, we're going to send troops to Ukraine. I'm not joking. This was on Le Monde yesterday. So this proves to all of you how totally disconnected they are. And if you ask, for instance, the French population, what is the main problem for you? Is it the war in Ukraine? This is the last of their troubles. The number one is the erosion of purchasing power. The fact that for the first time in ages, they are contemplating inflation in front of them. I talked to my providers here in Paris. They say nobody's buying anything. My butcher started to sell filet mignon because he said nobody's buying anymore. And when they come here, they buy 5 euros or something, sausages or whatever. It's absolutely, it's real. And we're talking about a very wealthy city in one of the wealthiest countries in the world and a wealthy neighborhood on top of it. It's completely crazy. So they are totally disconnected, And now we have, for instance, the possibility of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, back to action, which is a grassroots movement. They're very clever. They're not coming to Paris. So it starts in the provinces where they have 100% support everywhere. And the same thing that they were talking about in the past, less taxes, more state prisons to defend their social conquests of the past few decades, less corruption, because Macronism as a whole is an immensely corrupt machine, and strikes. There's going to be a series of strikes in France in the next few weeks until the end of the year, beginning of next year. Pensions, because they made some sort of maneuver, and people who could get their pensions starting at 62 now it's going to be 64 and soon 65. And this in France doesn't work. If you go after people's money here, wow, then you have people literally in the streets. So they are completely disconnected. Not to mention Germany. Now we could spend our whole program talking about how Scholz and his former traffic light government is disconnected from the German population, and they're going to present him in the next snap elections.
What about, I do want you to get your opinion really quickly because our chat is going crazy about Gorka. Did you, maybe John?
Yes, I saw what he said. Sarah, did he say that in the last 24 hours or so? Or it's an old quote?
No, it's recent.
It's recent.
Yeah.
So if we take him at his word, oh my God. Of course, I'll introduce a Russian point of view on the Trump cabinet, possible Trump cabinet, and the people who have been nominated so far and all that. Less than zero illusions. In fact, I'll try to give you the more or less consensual diplomatic think tank, Russian elite point of view about Trump 2.0. He will try to, let's say, a 10% or 20% less emphasis on Ukraine because he has three priorities in terms of the wars, hybrid or otherwise, that he wants to fight: Iran, Venezuela, and China. So obviously he will have to back down a little bit on Ukraine, offering something that the Russians are going to say, this is a joke. So this is the view in Washington, so in Moscow, sorry. So no illusions whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean, you just look through the cabinet picks, and it's very hard to even feel confident at all that even rhetorically the administration is going to be very against escalation in Ukraine. I mean, you look at someone like Michael Waltz, who is supposed to be the cabinet pick for national security advisor. He was making the rounds on mainstream media, criticizing the Biden administration for half-hearted sanctions, right? Talking about how they needed the resolution to send an extra $300 million to Ukraine in funding. I mean, these are the types of people who encouraged Trump to withdraw from the INF, and I wondered if maybe you could talk about that and the significance.
Absolutely. What happened in 2019? Now they're watching the consequences now, because if the INF was still in effect, Russia would not have been able to test Oreshnik. It's simple as that. There's a direct connection. Very, very simple. And the ABM treaty as well. The US is out of ABM and INF. And the Russians say, no problem. We'll continue our research. We have absolutely, they're very, it's fascinating because they're pragmatic. You can talk a lot about corruption in, let's say, the Russian industrial military complex. Of course there is. Not as exacerbated as in the US, but there is corruption as well. You sooner or later, you see a general being, sidelined because he was pocketing too much money. Right. But they are effective. And in terms of research, years or decades in advance, and in terms of their high educational standards in physics, mathematics, etc., they are unparalleled. And it's not a money laundering machine, because these weapons have to work. Otherwise, the central power in Moscow won't buy them and won't use them. So it's not like a project in the US that costs zillions of dollars and in the end is a total flop. a lot of people made a lot of money in the process. In Russia, no, it's not like that. You have to prove on, in this case, the battleground that it works. And Oreshnik is an example. And there are so many other systems at the same time. It's fascinating. Our friend Andrei Martyanov, I always recommend Andrei because I know him personally. He's very serious.
Yes.
He faces a lot of criticism of people who doesn't understand shit about military science. And if you read his 4 books in sequence and you follow his blog, this is what he has been saying for
the whole time.
Exactly. And this gap between both industrial military complexes and how effective they are comparatively and in battlefields around the world, no wonder. So chips from refrigerators, wow, they can do brilliant stuff.
Well, before we get back, I know you want to talk about Oreshnik. Before we get back to that, on Trump appointments, how do you feel about Marco Rubio from a?
Oh my God, I know. Oh shit, guys, I cannot even describe it.
Yeah.
Because Pompeo, he was, let's say, a credible Tony Soprano wannabe. Marco Rubio wouldn't even be cast in The Sopranos.
No.
He's too low life for that, And obviously, he understands less than zero of international relations. He may know a little bit about non-relations between the U.S., Cuba, or maybe Venezuela, maybe. But that's about it. He doesn't know anything else about the rest of Latin.
Well, he knows that he hates it. He hates all of Latin and South America.
So you mean he hates Latin Americans in both? Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, he hates himself. He hates that he hates himself.
He hates himself, or is that a self-hating Cuban American?
He's a Gusano, yeah.
Exactly, perfect.
Exactly. I used to hang out when I was in Miami at that Cuban restaurant, by the way, where they serve a fantastic rice and beans. So they all used to go to what's the name of that restaurant?
Cuba Libre?
I think it's called Versailles, a restaurant in Miami. This is one of their headquarters. And, Rubio is one of these. He's not even...
I don't remember who it was.
Marielitos that made a fortune in the US. You remember? I was watching Griselda the other day on Netflix. I was having a ball because it's the late 70s and the early 80s in Miami. And I remember how it was, and it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. But everything, the cast, the clothes, the cars, the music, and all that. And then the Marielitos arrived. And then many of them got rich in Florida because they worked a lot, which is not the case with Rubio. Do you know how he made his fortune in Florida? Do you have
I can't remember. Was it real estate or was it something else?
Real estate? Well, okay. Speculation, essentially.
Speculation.
Yeah, not real productive work.
Sounds right.
So I remember he had a lot of parking tickets. Do you remember that? He had like tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid parking tickets.
Well, I just saw that once he got appointed, there was one, I can't remember which one, but one Hispanic female pundit was like, he's going to be so amazing for Latin America. And I was like, oh gosh, meaning that they'll overturn all of the communist dictators of South America.
Yes, the pundit was probably Cuban American or Venezuelan American.
Venezuelan American, yeah. Yes. Of course. Yeah.
All the wealthy and the upper middle class in Venezuela, they have houses in Miami,
Of course. Okay, I'll get back to the fun stuff. So while we've actually been on, or while I was on the last show, Russia did confirm that they were ATACMS that landed in Kursk. So that means that while they had announced that they were ballistics prior, just to kind of keep it whatever, they've now confirmed that they were long range ballistics. So
they were ATACMS, yes.
This is a significant escalation. Yes.
It is, and they don't. But Sarah and John, it's not that they don't listen. It's much more complex than that. Can you imagine rewiring your brain when not only for these past 2.5 years, but for the past 10 years, you bet everything on Project Ukraine, and the whole thing is falling in front of you. You cannot even expect them to even try to introduce a little bit of nuance. No, they are completely blocked, because there was always, from the beginning, plan A was, let's inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. And now what's happening? Apart from the Russian resistance and the fact that Russia deflected all the moves, they are inflicting a strategic defeat on themselves with their suicidal policies and escalation. Can you imagine these people admitting that in front of the mirror?
It's a perfect example of collective cognitive dissonance, right? This is exactly
cognitive dissonance, and we're talking about a huge collective, because this includes, okay, most of those silos of power in the deep state, the whole of the White House, State Department, CIA environment, and Atlanticist-wise, the whole of NATO, the whole of the European Commission, the whole of the European Union, and virtually the whole of the European Parliament. It's a lot of people.
It's a lot. And it goes beyond Ukraine. I think this is a cognitive dissonance really about the emergence of the multipolar world fundamentally. And maybe this is a good shift to G20 and what we saw, some of the signals that came out of there. But it's a failure to recognize, right, when they're talking about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. Well, maybe this would have worked 20, 30 years ago, right, when we saw the fall of the Soviet Union, and there wasn't this other base of power yet. Of course, China was still much smaller than it is today.
They're starting to grow now, exactly.
Just starting to get on that, kind of, path of growth that we're seeing, where today it's borne all of the fruit. The Islamic world, of course, we've seen the development of Iran. Of course, we had the brutal war in Iraq, but Iraq now beginning to kind of find its way out of these tough last 20 years. Latin America, Africa, we've seen, all these movements in the Sahel. So the world fundamentally has changed. And of course, this is tied to the conflict in Ukraine, because when the West tried to impose these sanctions on Russia, what did they do? Well, they pivoted toward China. They pivoted toward it. They sold their energy to India. I don't think that the West fully appreciated, these new markets, these new poles of power. And so their cognitive dissonance isn't just about what's happening on the front line, but it's a failure to recognize these changes that we've seen on the global scale.
It's because, first of all, they don't study. Second, not only they don't understand the other in an anthropological sense, but they dismiss the other and they deride the other as inferiors. And we could write essays and essays about that, ever since the Greeks invented the term barbarian, which were non-Greeks who would speak like ba, 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 ba when they're trying to speak Greek. So this is the origin of the term barbarian, which, do you know who invented more or less the term barbarian? Euripides. Can you imagine? A playwright at the apex of Greece. So they could have been geniuses, but they were prejudiced to death as well. And this went from Greece to Rome, from Rome to the Catholic Church, and then, and it kept going for 2,000 years. And it's part of the Western psyche. Everybody else that is not West European and Europeanized Western, you are inferior. That explains a lot about the relationship between people in Europe with Slavs. Not to mention Asia, Africa, Marco Rubio's Latin America, etc. And Marco Rubio is one of the barbarians in the end. He was born as a barbarian, but then he became a comprador elite, and then he became fifth columnist, and now he considers himself one of them, those superior ones. So this is all part of how this is. It is really a barrier. And you can read all the Lévi-Strauss that you can read the Brodel about the Mediterranean. You can read Chinese scholars about the Chinese dynasties. That there is an enormous barrier between us in the West and them, everybody else, which is the garden jungle stupid Borel analogy, which was stupid, but it was based in reality. Because for them, these people, the Atlanticist people, and especially these people, these non-elected bureaucrats in Brussels, everything else is a jungle. And the jungle starts at the borders of NATO for them. Everywhere else. And the whole of Eurasia for them is, for them, the whole of Eurasia is like an invasion of the Mongols or invasion of the Huns, sort of, in the collective mentality, I'm not talking about the average citizen. I'm talking about the political elites, especially the current political elites. So that brings us to the number one problem, I would say, in all that is, if you don't replace these political elites by any means necessary, and elections are not enough, this will continue. This system of, in fact, not only not paying attention to the absolute majority of the planet, but trying to crush them or trying to fight them, will continue. And that explains why they cannot possibly understand the power of BRICS nowadays. During the BRICS summit in Kazan, Sarah, John, and our audience, you could count Americans, Canadians, and Europeans in one hand. You could count them. And the ones who were there, they were, of course, part of critical thinking and real independence. The very few, I remember seeing like 3 or 4 Americans max, 2 Canadians max, and Europeans, 7 or 8, not more than that. But they were independent at least. And they said, look, we face excommunication when we come back to Europe, but we had to come here. And the whole global south was there. The whole global south, from everybody, including people from countries who are not part of BRICS, and even BRICS partners, the new list of 13 BRICS partners, which, by the way, includes Bolivia, includes Cuba, which is fantastic, So you see at the same time how the drivers of this process, Russia and China, they really think in global terms. They never say out loud that, not that they despise or they don't pay attention, etc., to the West. They always invite the West different ways, Russians and Chinese. Why don't you join this enormous Eurasian integration process? And why don't you join BRICS and multilateral organizations? For instance, I was in South Africa 2 weeks ago. Lots of discussions, and they were in parallel with the G20. Very interesting. One of the guys is probably the best independent French geopolitical expert anywhere, Aymeric Choprade. And he has a fabulous thesis. He says basically that France should join BRICS because real France, patriotic France, has nothing to do with the European Union and with Brussels. And they will feel perfectly at ease with BRICS. Can you imagine even reading or debating something like this in Western mainstream media? Out of the question. So these are the ultra independents, but at least they exist, and they start a network. People pay. When he said that in one of our meetings, the Africans were like, including people from Mali and Senegal, former French colonies. They said, "Wow, what an idea! We never thought about this." So it starts a dialogue. Fascinating. You can have on the same table Russians, for instance, this guy from France. He was if I remember well, the only European. Lots of Africans from South Africa, from Mali, from Senegal, and we were discussing more or less what was being discussed during the BRICS summit in Kazan, and what the Brazilians tried to force the G7 inside the G20 in Rio to discuss, and in the end, they managed it. I was not expecting this, guys, and I was pleasantly surprised. the Brazilian diplomacy, they turned around the G7. They wanted to hijack the G20 in Rio, and they focused on fight against poverty, fight against hunger. Let's start this global campaign, fight against inequality. And in the final declaration, there was a mere mention of the war in Ukraine with no adjectives, no qualifying, no demonizing. And they forced the G7 to discuss Palestine. Of course, there was not a mention, an explicit mention of Gaza, but there was an explicit mention in the final declaration about the Palestinian sovereign state. This was enormous for a G20 summit because the Brazilians managed to extract some consensus, including people in the G7 who are actually supporting the genocide in Gaza. So this was an enormous diplomatic victory. It only happened because it was held in a global South country.
Well, I wanted to ask, I got to run in a couple of minutes, so I apologize. I'll get out a little early. And then Sarah, he's all yours.
Ask a question.
Well, I wanted to know about the ceasefire, but you go, John, since you have to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question related to the G20 and some of these meetings we've seen. We saw the meeting between one of the more interesting interactions I thought was between the Chinese and then the United Kingdom, and we see some of these kind of subtle signals coming from the Chinese government that we don't really care that much about.
We don't care about you. You are irrelevant.
Which is such a turnaround, right? From 70 years ago.
Very, of course, very polite Chinese way, but basically they're saying. The most important bilateral meeting in Rio was Xi and Lula. And then the next day, Xi went to Brazil. He was received like a mega rock star. They clinched 30-something deals and all that. And Xi even mentioned something that until recently was a sort of taboo, even in Brazil, that China is interested in financing this bi-oceanic railway, which would go from Brazil, crossing Bolivia and getting to Peru, to the port of Shanghai, and then from Shanghai all the way to Shanghai, which became the new motto in Peru and parts of Latin America. Everybody was saying, from Shanghai to Shanghai. It became almost like a popular song, So this was the main thing. The sea trip to South America, this was a game changer as well, because it's like the US didn't even exist at the APEC summit and then at the G20. Well, at the G20, they didn't exist because he was talking to a palm tree, you remember. But in Peru, the big superstar was Xi, because he went there to inaugurate a port that it's basically the new Silk Roads in the South American Pacific, all the way to Shanghai. But this is a game changer. No question about that. Can you imagine, let's say 5, 6, 7 years, if the Chinese said, okay, let's build this railway. Don't forget that they built a railway in the Tibetan plateau, 4,000 kilometers high, and they had to come up with engineering solutions that nobody had before. And they built a high-speed rail all the way to Lhasa. So for them to cross the Andes, ridiculous. They built the Karakoram Highway 50 years ago. And there's a plan as well to build a railway Karakoram Highway from Xinjiang all the way to southern Pakistan. So they can do it. They can do it. And if they think that this is going to be essential for China in terms of importing raw materials, not only from Peru and Bolivia, but also Brazil, don't forget Bolivia's lithium, for instance, they will build this thing in 5, 6 years. So the Peruvians got that. A lot of Latin Americans got that. And nobody was talking about the United States in both summits, which is something I never saw this before. Really. Incredible. Of course, everybody knew they were dealing with a lame duck president, but still, it's the power of the hegemon, right? Dismissed in Lima and then in Rio. Wow.
Absolutely. All right. I'll see you guys. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks
One last question. Bye, John. Thanks you for coming. We'll see you tomorrow. or later tonight. One last question. Okay, so we've been hearing ceasefire talks between, I guess, the United States is involved, but between Israel and Lebanon. I think the goal here is for Israel to claim victory by saying that they forced Lebanon to separate themselves.
You're right. Yes.
Do you want to give us your thoughts on this? Israel's currently bombing Beirut at the moment, but they also are saying we're closer to a ceasefire agreement than we've been ever. So kind of want to get your thoughts on that before we close.
It's so horrible because I have friends in Beirut. I write a column for The Cradle, which is based in Beirut. A lot of people who contribute to The Cradle, they have family members living in these neighborhoods that are being bombed literally every day. So it's beyond sad. I haven't gone because they said, no, it's not a good time to come. I have a standing invitation to go. I'm dying to go. They said, don't come now. It's too dangerous. But as soon as there's a window, maybe by January, I would like to go and see by myself. My friend, Professor Marandi, he was there less than 2 months ago, and we met in Istanbul. He had tears in his eyes, Sarah, because he saw the destruction in the Dahieh neighborhood, in front of him. And it's absolutely unbearable because these are civilian buildings.
Yeah.
And everybody who knows something about how Hezbollah operates and how they don't hide behind civilians in a heavily urban area like southern Beirut. The last time I was in Beirut, they took me around. They put me on a car. They showed me everywhere in these neighborhoods. They said, you see that? Was bombed by the Israelis in 2006. We rebuilt everything. They did. They rebuilt everything looked brand new. So now they're going to have to rebuild all of the 2.0 all over again. And these are civilian buildings with civilian families. Hezbollah, the weaponized arm of Hezbollah, to differentiate from their civil services operation, which is extremely sophisticated, communitarian spirit, everything. I'm sure you know about this. It's completely separate from the civilian arm of Hezbollah. So what the Israelis are doing is it's unqualifiable in terms of not only doesn't make sense, but it's so vicious. And you don't see one word on Western mainstream media everywhere, from the US and Canada and all over here in NATO-stan. Nothing. It's considered normal. They're fighting terrorists, just like Gaza, of course. So for all of us who at least see the absurdity of it all, it's very distressing. And there's nothing we can do about it. We're all impotent to do anything about it.
I think that's the point.
Yes, and that's
to show us how helpless we are.
How helpless we are, exactly.
Right.
Of course, we cannot trust the UN. We cannot trust all these UN-related mechanisms. We cannot trust NGOs that profess to be interested in humanitarian relief. You cannot trust anybody. In fact, you trust the power of Hezbollah in trying to inflict some, heavy damage to those Old Testament cycles. The power of the Houthis goes without saying. The power of the different strands of the Iraqi resistance forces. And that's it. And of course, Iran. And now Iran, it gets it into a very complicated territory, Sarah, because of the soon-to-be signed strategic comprehensive partnership between Moscow and Tehran. Ready. It's ready. It just the only thing missing is Pezeshkian and Putin sitting on a table in Moscow and signing it. This is going to, if we are on game-changing territory, this will be game-changing territory in many ways. And that explains why there's not been an Iranian response to those Israeli attacks so far. We are discussing among us for a while now. They are waiting for the signature of the agreement because the agreement is a military agreement. And of course, this military exchange between both has been going on since last year, since at least March, April last year, if I remember well, when there was an Iranian delegation in Moscow, and they were saying, look, the Russians said, what do you need? You said, whatever you want, and vice versa. So this has been going on for a year and a half at least. And this will include more S-400 systems in Iran. There are already some, but there will be more. And of course, collaboration on hypersonics as well between both. Iran has its own hypersonic industry and all that. So this will, the conflagration between Eretz Israel and the axis of resistance after this agreement is signed is going to go to a whole new level. And nobody knows what's going to happen next. As for Lebanon, yes, a ceasefire is a safe-facing measure for Tel Aviv because they will proclaim we won. You didn't win anything. On the contrary, because those people who live near the borders, they will never come back. And Hezbollah's firepower is still there. And they haven't used, they use what, maybe 5% of what they have. Not even that, you know. But Sarah, there's something important as well. The American drive to install a puppet government in Lebanon is in Lebanon huge. It's beyond huge. You're right. So they're not a ceasefire, no ceasefire. They won't abandon that. But you cannot have a puppet government in Beirut that doesn't take Hezbollah into account. This is out of that. This is a mirage. You know, it doesn't exist. So how they're going to accommodate, even if they have a puppet prime minister in Beirut, he's going to have to talk to Hezbollah. Represents a sizable chunk of Lebanon's population. Beirut is not, northern Beirut, where you get there, you look around, and you think you are in Dubai. No, this is a very small part of Beirut, you know. So it's up in the air, this whole thing, even if there is a ceasefire.
Okay, well, and on a happier note then, Shoigu in Afghanistan, that's happy.
Sarah, did you see what happened yesterday?
The agreement and the reconfirming the relations? Yes, very good.
No, but the most extraordinary thing is that, if I'm not mistaken, the Duma introduced a bill today to not qualify Afghanistan as a terrorist entity.
Oh, yeah. They're taking the Taliban off. Yep.
Anymore. So this will be approved. By the end of the year, it will be approved.
Oh, yeah.
So this means what? Starting next year, Afghanistan is a serious candidate to become a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah, and they should.
I have been writing about this thing for years, and I can't believe it's actually happening.
Oh, well, then I did pick a good note to end on. I knew you'd be excited about it.
Let's end with one auspicious note with this sea of grief around us, right?
Absolutely. And it's any good news for Afghanistan is always a happy note to end on, and they'll be open for business, I'm sure, by the end of 2025. I have lots of friends that are going there, and there's businesses, and they're ready. The Afghans are ready to open up that country.
You've seen how many infrastructure projects there are all across Afghanistan. Yeah. Most of them with China,
yeah.
From now on, also from Russia.
Yeah, it's over. Done.
And obviously the Iranians, the Indians, they will look at the map and say, well, maybe we can invest in something. The Indians already invested in building a road all the way to the Afghan border, so they can build inside Afghanistan from now on. So, and if they become a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, wow. Then game-changing territory again. Yeah. Then, can you imagine? Well, what happened in Afghanistan will not happen in Ukraine.
That's true.
And now we have to be realistic. The American exit of Afghanistan, as humiliating as it was, it won't be replicated by an American exit from Ukraine. We have no idea what will happen in Ukraine, but it won't be an Afghan solution.
Well, that's our show for today. What are you doing next? Where are you going? Are you staying in NATO stand for a little bit?
I'm staying NATO stand, sir. I'm tired. I'm trying to organize stuff. I'm looking at my archives. I'll be here until the end of the year and back in January. Yes, because I have an enormous video archive. And I have to think what I'm going to do with that, because these images are before 9/11, most of them. So nobody has these images. I have to find a way of perhaps doing a series of mini docs, or the people who saw the images, they were like, wow, So one thing, and my photos, I have to organize my photo archive as well. And even my old archives from Asia Times, I like to make them available for free.
Oh.
I have to find a way to do this. I think the best way maybe would be to put it on a Substack account and open to everybody. And it's a lot of stuff since 2000. So I have to think about what to do with all this stuff. It's a lot of material, and I like to have this material free for everyone.
We need to get you some interns, some free labor. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, but I don't like free labor. I like to pay people if they do a service.
I actually might have somebody for you, so I will get you in contact with them after.
Okay, let's keep in touch about this, Sarah. Thank you.
But you guys, thank you to everybody who joined us for the show. Thank you, Nazia, for our new member. Join us tomorrow. Larry Johnson is on the show Thursday.
Larry tomorrow, fantastic.
Yeah, Thursday, Danny Shaw. Friday, Mark Sloboda.
I'll be with him tomorrow as well.
Well, then everybody, the gang's back together. Okay.
Gang is back together.
Please buy us some coffees on Ko-fi.com. We have 2 big trips coming up, one to the front and one to possibly Iraq. And tomorrow night is our next space on Color Revolutions. Tomorrow we start Serbia. So thank you all.
When you plan to go to Iraq, Sarah?
January, February. You want to come?
No, because I can introduce you. I was there. Wow. Jesus, I was there before going to. I was there. I don't even know anymore, but I was there like 2 months ago.
Yeah, I remember with Syrian girl,
and it was amazing.
I know,
absolutely amazing.
That's why we all have to go now. You did their travel brochure, so now we're all dying to go. So big trip. Now we all need helicopter rides.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.
Namaste.